All right, thank you all for coming. The topic of today's panel is going to be digital trends. My name is Benoît Clément. I serve as Verra's Director of Financial Innovation in their Program Development and Innovation Department. We're going to be touching on some of the digital trends that are happening in the voluntary carbon market and also look at some of the opportunities and challenges. We'll probably start off with a couple introductions and then maybe open up the floor to some questions and see where we go from there. Thank you. All right. Well, as I've already introduced myself, I'll pass the mic over to Corinne,
Okay.
if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Hopefully we saved for the best for the last, but we don't have many people here, but we'll make it interesting, we promise. So, my name's Corinne Boone. I'm the group head for AirCarbon exchange for the Americas. And just in case you don't know about ACX, we're a global digital exchange, and we power the future. Our goal is to power the future of the environmental market. So we combine a typical traditional commodity structure with the blockchain, and we use blockchain for good. We operate in a permission environment. We're a fully regulated global carbon exchange, and we are aiming to provide efficiency, transparency, cost effectiveness, liquidity, and really showing and demonstrating the potential of digital to assist in really the globalization and the commoditization of the carbon markets. If we're going to get to net zero, we need to have a highly liquid, highly competitive, efficient, transparent market, and that's what we're in this business to do. I know there's some of you in this room that are all aiming to do the same type of work, and along with my co-presenters, we're all in this together, and it's our job to make sure we do this properly and effectively. So it's a great opportunity to be here, so thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. Neil.
Hi. Neil Cohn. I'm a CEO and a co-founder of CodeGreen. CodeGreen is really we're a group of coders. I've been in the carbon markets for 25 plus years, and it's obvious over the last 5 or 6 that there were technologies that could really help us scale and create projects that were more impactful and create more liquidity. And looking at the technologies, originally it was IoT, geospatial. How do we use that? How do we use AI and machine learning? And eventually, how do we use blockchain? And even looked at cryptocurrency, decided that's not it. So a lot of this was really driven by how originally I was working with the group at the Climate Warehouse at the World Bank. How do we create a decentralized system to reflect all of the carbon registries in a way that enables interconnectivity and stops double counting, but does not and still allows full autonomy? And blockchain was the perfect solution for that, for decentralization. But we had a hard time finding one that worked. And originally used Chia. It was really great core blockchain. Built that system, and it was obvious that the team that we put together with MIT was so amazing. We wanted to continue on and build. So that's what CodeGreen is. CodeGreen has been building additional systems from there, and it's me and a bunch of programmers. We're very heavily focused out of Asia, but it's a pretty exciting time. And we'll talk. I guess we'll introduce a little bit more later on our companies. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Nico van Aelstyn. I'm an attorney with SheppardMullin, and I've been active in the climate space for 17 years, something like that, a long time. Hence the gray hairs. When I started, I didn't have gray hairs. No, it's not true. So I'm the slowpoke here. These guys are running fast and creating the world, and I work in the legal world, which is struggling to catch up and try to manage the risks and opportunities, but mainly the risks being lawyers, that arise in these contexts. So we advise a number of clients that have token products, for example, about how to not be FTX, for example, and particularly in the carbon space. So there's a lot of uncertainty. We'll get into it more, but that's kind of, I'm the lawyer, so I'm used to being the wet rag at a party. So that's kind of my role here.
Perhaps we could do a quick pulse check with the audience to kind of grasp the general understanding of the room with some of the technologies that are emerging. Could we see a show of hands based on whether or not blockchain and tokenization is a completely brand new concept for anyone here?
No.
Fantastic. Well, wonderful. Perhaps we could do a quick round on talking about efficiencies. Corinne, you mentioned how some of these digital trends could help with greater efficiency, and we could just do a little bit of perspective from our panel here to explore how some of these digital trends could enhance efficiency.
So we leverage the blockchain, for the efficiencies and the transparency and the historical ledger that it enables us to provide. So we believe that, in the carbon market, I've been in the carbon market for, I don't know, maybe around the same time as Neil, maybe a little bit longer, I'm not sure, but we've both been in 25 plus years, and I think I can probably speak for both of us when I say, and probably for many of you, that to get from the idea for an offset project through to the execution and the transfer of carbon credits in the early days, and even today to some extent with bilateral and over-the-counter types of transactions, it can take months, and we have a lawyer in the room, it can take months to just negotiate a legal contract, and it can take a long time to settle on price, to deal with all the liability, the delivery, all of these issues. And the cost of that for project developers that are trying to really do good offset projects and finance a future stream of carbon credits to help with the climate crisis, but also to provide innovation and technology takes a lot of time, a lot of money, and the success rate is often very, very low. And what we find with the blockchain is that by being able to combine the elements of the blockchain that provide a pure historical ledger and transparency, along with the digital aspects of operating an exchange, which lead you to develop electronic digital receipts, what we used to refer to as tokenization of carbon credits, really enables you to provide and then transacting carbon credits on an exchange really enables you to reduce some of the costs associated with getting from the beginning of a transaction to the end. We have everybody has gone through a significant know your client process, and they've all passed all of the risk issues that you might talk about in the legal profession. They're all they have permission to trade. They can be secure that if they're a buyer and they go onto a carbon exchange and there's a historical ledger and all the clients have gone through the same process and it's a membership-based permission environment, they can be sure that what they're buying is real. They're going to get the delivery, if they're in the spot market, almost instantaneously. We don't have any issues with double counting because every carbon credit that we transact sits on a registry. It never comes into our ownership. It's all held in a trust structure. So there's a lot of transparency, a lot of efficiency. The cost effectiveness is there. They don't have to spend months negotiating a carbon contract and then worry about delivery risk and all that thing. All those issues, issuance has already taken place. So it really, and also, I mean, the digital world is not anything new for any of us that have bank accounts and that do electronic banking. Digital is a good thing. It provides cost effectiveness, efficiency, lets us keep track of what we're doing. It's not digitalization that's bad, and this is one of the things that I wanted to make a point of. That is, it's how you use digitalization, how companies and corporations and people use technology. What makes them highly efficient or not effective. And so really what we're trying to all do in our own different ways is drive efficiencies, use blockchain for good, and really demonstrate that digitalization can lead to the liquidity and the volume and the cost effectiveness and the price transparency that we're all looking for if we're going to use the markets in one of the ways in which to address the climate crisis.
Perhaps we could address safety, after running through this question. But Neil, what are some of the benefits that you see from these technologies?
Yeah, I think, Corinne, I appreciate, first of all, anybody up here, we're all the responsible parties. That's why I think we're asked to come up. We're putting the environment, we're putting people first. We're trying to make sure that we don't have a blow up. We've been working on climate now 30 plus years. We've on the policy, on creating markets, on creating a viable way to bring investment into climate activities. And at 30 years, we're finally a young adult getting stuff done. and then you bring in digital and then crypto, that's a really moody teenager or preteen, and they're okay burning down the house as long as they get to experiment and it's all cool. We can't take those risks. So I appreciate Corinne, like AirCarbon Exchange, saying, hey, we don't have any way to do decentralized KYC AML, so we're going to create this closed system and do it for everybody coming in. We're going to watch everything. It is using blockchain, but I always want to go to the next level. I want to see how do we push this out there, because ultimately what I want to do is I think climate is our pain point right now, but how do we use blockchain and digital and decentralization to change the global situation, change the financial equity. We don't have justice in our system. I was born in this country with the color of my skin and my situation, so I could achieve. Somebody else born in Democratic Republic of Congo or Tuvalu or somewhere else doesn't have those opportunities. How do I use this system to create a more equitable, level playing field? And I think that we can do that. We can use climate to drive it. And the technologies don't exist. So, blockchain's a great start. And how do you build it better? And that's what I've been working on creating. And luckily, I've found, after a long time, the right team. And together, we are building for that. How do you create systems that can have KYC and AML, even though they're decentralized? And you're going to see products from us coming out with some major organizations that will help that. How do you create pathways to truly use these tools and push them to the next level to get to where we all want to go, where we're not sitting in a country and waiting for the next fund to come to us, but we can get up and say, hey, I can prove my digital identity. I can prove my ability to that I am accomplishing these goals, and I can access a more democratized tool set and capital and make things happen. So we truly do scale climate activity, and hopefully it does spread to the broader financial system. So that's where I'm going.
Thanks, Neil.
Well, the kind of efficiency that digitalization brings that Corinne and Neil have just talked about, their subtext is they're trying to get rid of me.
No, we're trying to.
I'm joking, but I mean, there is that kind of efficiency. Not to say that a smart contract in blockchain is a real contract. It's not. Don't let anybody fool you on that. So there is, but that is the kind of efficiency. I mean, you guys have spoken to this very, very well, so I really can't just repeat it. But with that efficiency comes the opportunity to scale and to really expand out. We'll talk more in a moment, Benoît, as you mentioned, about the risks and the dangers from a legal standpoint. But one way to address that is to have a membership organization, which is what ACX does. So you've addressed the AML, the anti-money laundering, and the Know Your Customer KYC issues right up front at the door upon entry. Neil, you're trying to operate in a much broader Wild West world, which is the world that most of us occupy. And so the law is trying to play catch up to make essentially Neil's world look a little bit more like Corinne's world, as it were. And it's a challenge. It's a real challenge.
Well, the goal is to incorporate them into one.
Yeah.
That's the goal.
That's the goal. It's a lofty goal.
Well, anything beyond that is sure failure. I think, can I just say one thing, and I'm going to bring this up. We had this session last year, and Corinne, you might remember I said there's going to be blood in the streets on crypto. And I said it very clearly. It was obvious because you saw it. I'm like, this is not going to end well for many people. And I said very soon there will be collapses and there will be problems. And I'm not saying I'm pressured. It was pretty obvious. Sorry.
Maybe we can kind of begin to explore some of the challenges, the difficulties that we're experiencing in this space. Do you want to kick this off, Corinne?
Yeah. I mean, I think, I guess one thing I would say, I mean, even read, I woke up very early this morning, the time difference, even 3 hours gets you sometimes, and I didn't actually get to read the whole article, but the headline was that the SEC had taken away the authority of one of these crypto banks. I'll have to look it up, just because they generally didn't understand something that they were trying to do, and so they were coming back saying, you just approved us last year to operate, and then this, yesterday you took away our our ability to operate. But I guess one of the things that I want to say is, we have this head of IT at AirCarbon Exchange, and I must say, most of the time when he starts talking, and I think it's a good thing, and you probably can relate to this more than I, and I've got one of my colleagues here in the room, totally goes right over the top of my head. And it's because he lives in that DeFi space, Neil, that you are trying to work with and be in and aspire to. Amazingly intelligent and really understands how decentralized finance can make the world a better place, and he believes in that. And we're going to get there eventually. But I guess the way in which we've been developing AirCarbon is that we want to operate, we want to demonstrate that we can operate in, one of the subject matters that you brought up, Benoît, was in a safe environment. We feel it's really important, and it opens the door for organizations such as yours, Neil. So we really feel it's important to, so we're in a permissioned environment right now. We use certain aspects of the blockchain. We don't use others. We don't retire and then tokenize and then transact retired credits. We don't deal at the retail basis. We deal entirely at the institutional basis. We went out and sought global regulation because we felt it was really important to demonstrate to the regulatory world and to the business world and to the environmental world that you can actually do this in a logical step-by-step manner and build the trust and the confidence so that when we want to go to the next step like you're trying to get to now, that we're going to say, okay, we've demonstrated to you that we can operate in a safe environment. We had membership. We operate in a closed loop. We've taken all the steps. We don't hold carbon credits. They sit on registries. Now we want to see if we can expand that envelope a little bit further. And once we as a community, our company, Neil's company, the legal work that you're doing, the whole world that's involved in this space, really trying to drive digital, if we demonstrate to those that are watching us, and it's not just the UN and it's not just the governments, it's the markets too. We're trying to speak the language of the markets. If we demonstrate and build that trust and confidence, they'll go to that next step that Neil and his company want to go to right away. So we sort of feel like we're providing some of the basis for, by instilling trust and confidence and demonstrating that you can do it over time to enable it to grow. Because, just like you said, Neil, what happened with crypto, I think it all happened so quickly that, nobody really saw the explosion coming. Maybe you did, but a lot of people, just didn't, right? So let's do it properly.
By the way, that wasn't last year, it was just 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And at the last NACW, I made that statement.
I was thinking of NACS.
Yeah.
What's that?
NACS in New York last fall.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in September. Yeah. But just to finish
when
the
I
point,
said that.
we're all in this together for the good of the environment. I think that's what we need to remember about
I said
all
it a
of
few
this.
times.
So.
Neil, if I remember correctly, Neil, you're working on addressing some of those challenges through some of your current work.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, so Corinne, what AirCarbon Exchange is doing is great for now because it's creating it is a closed, permissioned system. Digital helps, blockchain, I'm not jumping the gun. I've been playing goalie as Benoît.
No, I'm not saying that.
So what we're trying to do is how do we defend all of the progress we've made on climate without blowing up the markets, without being an FTX of climate, and that needs better tools.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is that, if you have the ability to create, not just use the Ethereum and the platforms that are created, but build on them to get better, you can't get there. It's just a lot of hard work, and takes work and money and time. But everything we're doing now is really getting there step by step. We do have ways to do this, but obviously you want to make sure that what you're doing is incredibly solid legally, technically. For humanly, you want to be right for all aspects. It's got to be right for the economics of it, but it's got to be right for the planet and for people. And we look at that for everything, as everyone should.
As everyone should. I just, Benoît, I want to pick up on your question about safety and sort of key off of a comment that Corinne made. So the regulatory agencies, and in the US it's primarily the SEC and the CFTC, they're the ones that are charged with trying to bring some degree of safety to this world. And of course, they operate in the broader world, and we know that the frameworks with which they work are not completely successful, as we know from Silicon Valley Bank recently, right? So, I mean, the fact that you have well-established rules doesn't mean that you aren't going to still have problems. You clearly will. There will be fraud, there will be problems. So that's not unique to the digital space. But what is interesting, and this is why it's moving, is that these agencies thus far have not articulated any new regulations. They are to address either the voluntary carbon market or crypto. They're both watching very, very closely, but they haven't actually articulated any rules, and they say, we can work with the tools that we have. They're applying the traditional tests. So the SEC is applying the Howey rule, and there have been literally dozens of cases against crypto companies as marketing unregistered securities or acting as exchanges illegally in the last 2 years, dozens. And they filed like 3 right after FTX, just to make the point, I think. So they're really focused particularly on crypto. I want to focus more on the CFTC, on the commodity side, for 2 reasons. One, we advise most of our clients that have products in this space, try to, under the Howey test and other tests, try to ensure that you're a commodity rather than a security. It's generally safer, and in the carbon world, it's long been recognized as a commodity for the most part. I mean, you have the CCX back in the day. So it's kind of a natural fit. And the CFTC is clearly focused on this. I don't know if people really appreciate it. I think it was really significant that the CFTC chairman, Rostin Beynon, came here yesterday to speak. That is a demonstration of real interest. And we know thus far all they're doing is information gathering. And he made it clear they have no plans for regulations as yet. But I wanted to, actually there was if I may, I'll just read a quotation from a CFTC commissioner, Christy Goldsmith Romero, March 7th, just a few weeks ago. And it's in this same context, talking about doing what they had done in the digital space and bringing it to the carbon space with the voluntary carbon market. And she said, a thoughtful approach is to have the commission increase its oversight by first categorizing products as environmental climate related and then conducting oversight similar to our approach for overseeing digital assets. Heightened review, targeted law enforcement, and increased market surveillance can ensure the integrity of these markets so that they are resilient to setbacks and contribute to a sustainable future, unquote. What does that mean? Enforcement actions. They're gathering information, and what's the tool that they know how to use now that they have, and Chairman Beynon yesterday made very clear, is their enforcement authority to go after the underlying cash transactions. That's where I think we're going to see the guidance that we're going to get from these agencies. They're going to do it through examples, making examples of a company. And they would love to find an FTX in the voluntary carbon market to be able to show this is how you don't do it. And I would not be at all surprised if we saw something happen here.
Corinne, you previously highlighted some of the safeguards that you're currently deploying to address some of the risks. You mentioned having a permissioned environment, performing KYC. I'd like to just open this to the panel to comment on other kinds of measures that they're looking at actively developing or deploying in these approaches as we're looking at exploring these technologies further.
Safety measures or?
KYC or?
Yeah, I think that things will come out. The one thing I've learned in these markets is that it's best when you have something to actually bring it out.
Yeah.
It would be good to hear questions. Can we go to that? I think it'd be fun.
Yeah.
Also, it'd be good if we got beyond just these legal issues. If we what other uses are there, like MRV and supply chain that we could be doing?
Absolutely, yeah.
Maybe I could just make one comment, if that's okay, before we go there. So the way that I like to think about this whole context is, I don't know, a lot of you have probably been involved in some of the international markets, some of the domestic markets, some of you from different countries. And, when you think about it, like right now, like there's all of the markets that are developing in the domestic regimes under the Paris Agreement. There's all of the, the different domestic markets, the regional markets, voluntary carbon markets, other compliance markets that will develop. And if we're, again, if we're going to get to the point where we can actually use carbon markets to really help us address part of the issues around, getting to net zero by, 2050, we have to be able to have a market that uses the kind of technology that can enable interconnectivity, interoperability, fast, efficient transactions and clearing, and getting to the next level of digitalization and all of the opportunities that it offers. And so, I guess what I like to think about, and maybe some of you have some ideas or some thoughts on that, is how do we develop this responsibly, carefully, on a step-by-step basis, recognizing that if we do it properly, there is so much potential for this market. And the financial players will jump right in, and we need money to actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We can have all kinds of aspirations as individuals, as governments, as countries, as environmental organizations, what have you, but the people that are actually, the organizations that are actually going to help us reduce these, get towards net zero are the corporations and the financial industry with money to invest in real projects in places in the world that really do need, equity and justice as well, Neil. So I think we got to think about it that way. How do we make sure we don't, sorry, I don't mean to be blunt, but let's not screw it up. We've seen what happens, we saw what happened with crypto. We've seen, what happens when you make small mistakes. They have huge consequences. How do we put all our minds together and figure out how to do it right? We've all got, up on this stage, we've got like 70 years of experience in carbon and climate. Like, I'm sure in this room, if you probably multiply that by how much? Yeah, anyway. How do we do it right? Like, if you have thoughts and ideas, let's chat about it. I think that's the really interesting part about this.
Yeah, well, maybe let's are there questions in the audience that we might be able to? Yes, please, in the back.
I'm really loud without the mic anyways. So. I really like the last point you made that, like, how do we do it right? I think a lot of this carbon space is, we are really focusing on the carbon technology and markets, but a big piece of NCS intervention lies also in equity and community well-being and all of that. And I think we are not still seeing that pairing of carbon financing with community well-being financing. And how are we going to really meet our climate goals if we are not ensuring the well-being of the communities? We like, carbon is something, but people are more important. So I would love the panel to share what is their vision, how they're thinking, and where should we be heading in that direction.
I have some initial thoughts on that. Verra, in addition to carbon, its VCS program, it has the Sustainable Development Verified Impact Standard, or SD-VISTA for short. There's also its CCB program, Climate and Community Biodiversity Standards. I see opportunities with emerging DMRV technologies to be able to track these additional kinds of metrics, to verify the impact, the additional environmental and social impacts, the co-benefits that are happening on these projects. And it'd be interesting to also have them on a distributed ledger technology where you have an audit trail. But yeah, please, any other comments?
I was just I guess to give you an example to start. So on AirCarbon's exchange, like we have a typical spot market structure. If you're a trader, you can just go in and say, I just need 100,000 carbon credits, and I need them by the end of this month because I need to balance out my book. I don't care where they come from. I want the best price, but they need to be issued by a standard registry like Verra, Gold Standard, or whatever. But then we have other clients that are saying, okay, I want to buy some carbon credits. Sure, I need them for my voluntary commitment or my compliance commitment, but I also want carbon credits that have other benefits, whether they be CCBs or whether they be other sustainable development goals. And even more recently, we've seen like the W+ types of carbon credits come up, and that will get reflected in the price. And we have tools on our exchange whereby you can define when you want those types of attributes associated with your project, and that does go on the blockchain, right? So you have some clients do have have some say over what it is that they want to buy and what benefits are with it. But I think this equity and justice aspect is something that Neil is really quite passionate about too, so maybe hand it over to Neil.
Thanks. I think we learned in Carbon 1.0, it was all about the tons. We weren't really focused on impact. We didn't have the Sustainable Development Goals. we just said, gosh, global warming, as we called it back then, is a huge problem. What do we do? How do we address it? Or eventually climate change. But I think, especially Millennial Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, we have a roadmap, and we recognize that without sustainability, climate is irrelevant. We have to have both. And completely agree with everything you said about looking at the communities. And the real issue that we have is that there's no real guidance. We have this incredible roadmap, 17 goals, right? But the metrics aren't there. And everybody just puts up like, oh yeah, this touches gender, this touches that, but they don't really have any way to measure that. It just becomes window dressing. And we're actually working on how to get more, a better universal framework on this. And how do we actually have metrics that are real? And how do we actually track those in a way? And that's a tremendous amount of work. And so I'm part of a group with the Public Foundation and with others that are really now deeply getting into this. Also a group called Rewired Earth that we're working with. How do we deliver the impact in a way that is actually meets, first of all, the demand of the consumers that want to see it, meets the real direction that the Sustainable Development Goals were meant to go, and also can really be attached to the carbon and shown. And we don't have that yet. I think that this Gold Standard tried, Verra's tried, they're not active. I'm sorry, I wish they were. And it's because there's no comparability, there's no reporting standard, there's no framework, and that's gonna come together, but it's gonna have to be a consensus type of a product, and there are those that are trying to do it. I'm very involved in that.
I'm excited to hear that, Neil, and I look forward to seeing that, because I can imagine, and I'm just imagining, a real role for digital technologies in this kind of space to address this. And the example that came to my mind was micro lending, and look at the cell phone banking that is prolific in much of the world where they don't even have electricity. Those kind of digital technologies can allow the scalability at the community level. But the other point I would make about this is that it's just that, a tool. To your point, we need to have that greater focus upon the community and bringing together justice with addressing climate. My brief tangent, my wife works in international human rights work in much of the world, and in so many of the conflicts with which she is working at the community levels, the underlying cause is often land use disputes. And those, have climate ramifications. So and yet the two communities, the accountability world that she works in, the climate world that I work in, rarely talk to each other. And yet on the ground in these communities, those problems are often one and the same. So we really do need to find a way to focus on that more.
No, it's great. I'll just, one thing, with carbon projects, obviously land tenure and the ability to actually claim that is incredibly important.
Yeah.
And that is something that some of the technology we're working on could eventually solve. But it's a good comment. And I would recommend one company, and I know that cook stoves have taken a hit, but a company called Cocoa Fuels that's now in Kenya that I've been working with and advising for a decade is incredible. It actually is bringing a lot of benefit. These are cook stoves on liquid ethanol, so they're basically creating a system that is much safer and cleaner. And really, there are those that are out there really focused on community and taking all of the carbon benefit they create and giving it back to the community. That's another thing, is you look at the carbon trading and whether or not it helps the community, the bulk of the revenue and the profit from the carbon goes to the middlemen. It doesn't go back to the community. And that's not right either. So track the money. And that's a big thing that we could be doing as well. It's track where that money is going, and
blockchain can provide that
we can
tool
do
as well.
that.
You know, on that topic, looking at carbon revenue streams as a thread, there's lots of cases to be made for co-benefits in that, you know, if there's providing these additional educational benefits or additional revenue streams, you start weaving together a much stronger fabric that actually begins reducing the risk profiles for those communities, for those projects. And I think tracking all of that in a way that is transparent and efficient can be incredibly meaningful.
One comment that, if it's okay, I'd like to make is that another part of my working life focuses on ESG specifically, and I sit on some boards, and one of them is a mining board, and so I watch what happens in the mining space quite significantly, and I've actually been watching what's happened in the climate space quite recently with, you know, there's a lot of stakeholder activism now, which is going into projects and into companies. I mean, you know, we have examples of Shell and the Dutch government saying, you're not doing enough on climate. If you don't, you have to do X, Y, Z, and I'm gonna fine you if you don't do it, right? We've got those examples of, yeah. But we see that in you know, like some of the big pension funds and the big private equity funds and things like that that are investing, you know, into you know, climate projects or investing in companies. They're saying, if you don't show me what you're doing, you know, in the countries that you operate on ESG considerations, social, community, and, you know, specifically climate considerations, I am not investing in you. And we see some activist investors that are coming in and saying, I'm going to take your board seats, right? Because I want you to focus on, you know, social, community, and climate. And if you're not doing it now, who's to say you're going to do it later? And I think a lot of that's going to transfer over into the climate space. And so I think, you know, although we like to talk about not being regulated and figuring out how to do some things in a very decentralized basis, some of that influence is going to, you know, foster over, and, you know, and we're going to be forced to do it based on the fact that we need money in the climate space to do good climate projects, and we should be doing it, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, you think about the CFTC, and they might be sitting back quietly watching, but it's only a matter of time before they make some profound statements.
I agree.
You know, we went fully regulated through the financial services regulatory authorities, and we are designated as a commodity and defined as a commodity under our global regulatory provision. And we sought that because we wanted real clarity. We wanted the regulators, we want the world to understand that carbon is a commodity, and we need to treat it like a commodity in much the way that the financial industry understands, so that we can get the certainty into the financial industry that they can actually invest in these kinds of projects and get something in return that also helps the developing world. Because let's face it, like, you know, and I think the other thing, just to throw out on there for discussion, I think the countries are going to determine what happens, you know, at the community. We still haven't seen, you know, what's allowed in all of these domestic carbon regimes and what the NDCs are going to come out with in terms of what's allowed, you know, under their Article 6.2 and Article 6.4, and what's in the voluntary market, what's in the compliance market. I think that's going to provide us a lot more clarity about where we need to focus to ensure that we're you know, pursuing, you know, equity and you know, good community-based projects as well. I'm really excited to wait to see what happens in that space. I don't know about if anybody else thinks about that.
I want to hear more from the audience.
Do we have more questions? Yes, please.
Hi guys, my name is Ethan. I'm an undergraduate at USC, but also working on a startup named Carbon Link. I have two questions. The first one specifically is for Verra. Any update, any insight, or any timeline on you know, tokenization that you could provide for us?
When we concluded our consultation summary, which was published, I think, in February, there continues to be internal discussions on how we can continue to develop our policies in this evolving space, and we're hoping to be making more public announcements on some of those evolutions.
Thank you. And the second question is for Neil specifically, but would love more, you know, insight. I think in the beginning you said carbon as cryptocurrency is, you kind of decided is not, you know, the way to move forward. I'd love some more.
I never thought it was the way to move forward. No, first of all, we don't have, if you want to do true DeFi, there is no KYC AML. There's no way to do that with carbon. And as soon as it was obvious that players, I had waited very patiently to tokenize carbon. I had been looking at it for years, but saying, hey, we don't have the ability to manage that, and I can't risk that for something as important as this. So unless you're doing a closed loop system where you're KYC, AML every single customer, once you get it out there, you could transfer the wallet, go any way you want. That is difficult to keep in compliance. So, and when I say cryptocurrency, I mean creating a currency that is not based on anything beyond kind of like the perception of it being worth something to somebody else, and everyone's just kind of nodding and winking at each other. That's not great either. But what I meant before is like, I hope we could start tokenizing more assets to making them more liquid and be able that you and I could just tap our cell phones and trade. But at that point, we better have a digital identity and better be able to be under a regulated regime so we don't get ourselves into trouble. We don't create a blow up. So, I would love to see it, but we're building those systems out so that we could all do that.
Perfect, thank you.
We have any other questions in the audience? Okay. Yeah, I would like to pose this question to the panel. How do you guys see digital solutions helping project developers and buyers with price discoverability more specifically?
I guess maybe I'll just start it off. I don't actually see digitalization helping with price discovery per se. I think it helps with transparency and with efficiency. And I think that transparency and efficiency lead to cost reductions for project developers in actually undertaking their projects. I think the price discovery will come based on the buyers and sellers bidding in the market. And as we can show more and more of that, I think it's not really the project, because the markets that we're operating in right now are the spot markets, and eventually will be the futures markets. And the project developers are often they're trying to finance their projects by looking at a forward price for carbon credits. So I think there's still going to be another market for that. But I think one of the things that we don't often talk about is the fact that often project developers have to essentially sell the farm in order to get their projects developed, right? And the transaction costs are 20, 30, 40%, of the revenues. And sometimes they don't even see revenues for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And we have to stop that. Like, we have to figure out how to cut that out, because the money has to go back in. They want to put money into new projects. And so if we can improve transparency and efficiency and help to reduce costs for project developers going forward to get their projects developed, I think that's the important thing. The price discovery will happen on the exchanges between buyers and sellers based on supply and demand. But that doesn't help you when you're trying to get a project developed. That's going to take a couple of years. So,
Right.
My thoughts anyway.
Right.
I almost agree with you, Corinne, which is unusual.
That's the first, by the way.
I know, it's like, that's
no,
unusual.
we're just kidding.
No,
We're
I mean,
frenemies.
digital doesn't really. I mean, what it could do, obviously, as far as price discovery is true, it could help that. When you say transparency, I really believe in more of a permissionable transparency, and that's part of what we're creating in decentralized systems that actually enable full autonomy of your data, so that you could decide how to share it programmatically, who gets to see my data, who gets to use it, how can it be used. One of the systems we helped develop, like with the IFC, if we truly had a carbon tokenization system that enabled it to be done with KYC, AML, and be done correctly, you could be a developer and have direct access, so you wouldn't have these massive fees. And you would see it, and you'd say, hey, this is the price it's trading. Why would I sell below that? Because you would have access to do that. And ultimately, if you had a more of a commoditized instrument that was digital, you would be able to use that to leverage and to borrow money against it to finance your projects, to do more project finance, like we see in renewable energy. So that's where it could go.
Yeah.
But again, we're getting close. We're not quite there.
I don't really have anything to add.
Yeah. I found myself wondering how, if carbon credits could almost have this sort of e-commerce-like experience where you're going on Amazon or BestBuy.com and you've got this like millions of data points that you're able to compare across similar products and be able to make confident buying decisions very quickly. You've got, the price ranges, you've got the most important attributes, you've got the number of reviews or ratings, the averages, et cetera. And I found myself wondering what opportunities are there for registries to be able to have their infrastructure, their assets, their units in a format that allows for these new kinds of mechanisms to take shape that could help project developers price more quickly or help and fairly, but also help buyers be able to feel like they're making more confident decisions so they can not only purchase more frequently, but also encourage new entrants to come in and purchase who've just been standing on the sideline. Because, taking 8, 12 months, a year plus to go through a due diligence process is quite difficult. But there's also this challenge of the buyers wanting to be able to purchase something that has this sort of, rubber stamp of approval from some large entity saying that they're not going to get any backlash in the future for purchasing something that, granted, all methodologies are always going to be able to benefit from future improvements. We're always going to be working with imperfect systems. So there's kind of an intersection of some pretty wicked problems that we're trying to solve, but hopefully through these technologies, there's ways where we can increase efficiency, we can have greater eyes on the ground, which could also help potentially with methodology development and such too. If you're collecting live data streams from projects on the ground and being able to see where the hangups are in meeting the requirements for various methodologies, that's again a space where the intersection of DMRV, blockchain, tokenization of that data for rapidly comparable information can help inform live continuous improvement. I'd like to poll the audience again, see if there's any questions that have come up over the last few minutes. Yes, please.
Thank you. From the perspective of growing these systems and evolving these markets, what do you see as far as human capital needs?
Could you repeat the question more time, please?
Oh, sure. What do you see as human capital needs as you're growing, these mechanisms and this industry overall, carbon finance, in terms of, obviously there's a dedicated community who is already working on it, which is exemplified by you, but also, the industry's growing. So what do you need as it does grow?
I have a really strong feeling about that.
Why don't you start?
I'd like to say carbon project developers don't grow on trees. I have yet to see any kind of training program or educational institution that is pumping out certified carbon project developers. I mean, this is a pretty big set of speed bumps that lots of project developers face. Essentially, project developers not only have to have traditional project management skills, but they also, or at least have to be working with data managers or have that ability. They also have to be experts in the standard that they're working with and those methodologies. And these people don't grow on trees. It seems like, you just kind of have to start going out in the field and start being a carbon project developer, which I'm grateful for the people who have the courage to do that, but it does slow down the process for registries that are looking to review those projects, whether we're running into basic issues like completeness checks or having the level of quality of content that needs to be in those submissions to meet the requirements of those methodologies that they are looking to use for their projects. This also goes for auditors too. Auditors also have this really difficult position. It'd be fantastic if some kind of startup could create an app or some kind of training program, select your standards, select the methodology. We'll give you a certification in 10 weeks or however many months. And so that's one thought on human capital that could be really beneficial in this space.
No, go ahead.
I think there are factories for developers. What are they? There's obviously university programs that have sprung up, but NatSource, when we started that and we built this, if you look around this conference, there are dozens of people here that had worked through that system, and then Echo Securities and now South Pole and other major shops is where people go to learn. You can't exactly give them, you can't give a kid a scalpel and say, go do brain surgery after a YouTube video. You have to go and learn, and usually the best way to do that is being part of an organization. Maybe you want to stay there, maybe you want to move on and create something that's complementary or even competitive. But more developers, as long as they're doing it the right way is better. It's more projects, it's more development. There are tools that we could use using AI, using digital to improve that. And actually working on some things like that, which are great for other parties, but it's a process. And I would say anyone who wants to get involved should go to one of the shops that's hiring and start at the ground floor, and get to work, and eventually you'll do more.
So maybe if I could, in the sustainable finance sector, for example, and I'm a Canadian, and we have the Chartered Professional Accountants of Canada. It's a very large organization that's funded by all of the accountants in the country. You have AICPA and others here in the United States, and they have a whole educational stream now on sustainable finance and environmental auditing, and they've started getting into the climate space because they realize that the accountants at the end of the day in these corporations are really the ones that are going to make us all accountable, right? Because they have to report on it, and along with these regulations for reporting and disclosure that are coming out of the SEC, and that that are going to come out with the true up for the Paris Agreement and all of these things, that we need expertise to do that. In terms of the product development, and we under the United Nations process with the Kyoto Protocol, there was a whole, if you remember, there was a whole system for accreditation of designated operational entities, that could undertake the development of protocols, that could undertake verification, that could undertake monitoring. And I think there's some real lessons to be learned from that process that the UN had in terms of the licensing. And then, I think one of the challenges and one of the solutions, I think everybody should start bombarding the registries, to be honest, because, and this is not meant to be a criticism at all, but we all know, those of us that are waiting to get, projects through the issuance phase, know that there's a huge bottleneck of human capacity to work with these registries to get good project carbon credits out the door. So why not, maybe something that Verra and others could do is start some sort of sorry for giving this suggestion, but start some sort of an internship program with all the universities in the areas that you're operating, and say, give us your brightest that are interested in this, and we'll take them on for 4 months. Instead of trying to teach people in a 2-hour class or a 50-minute class the basics of doing product development, get them in there and start reviewing your methodologies and your submissions. And man, I used to do that Cantor. I worked at Cantor Fitzgerald for 10 years and was charged of origination. And there's some biggest and brightest minds that have been here at this conference that I hired as summer students, and they got passionate about it because they got to get their hands dirty. I don't mean that in bad, because it's climate change and it's supposed to be good, but they really got to get into the weeds, and I think that's so important. And you're probably already thinking about it, but you should do that.
I like that idea. I also wonder, how do we invest all that time and resource into developing that kind of human capital before it gets, use this term, but poached by other project developers. But yeah, it is very curious. I will say we're excited to be launching in the very near future digitalized methodologies. There's going to be a stakeholder portal, a platform and stuff that's going to be definitely helping us expedite the review process and such, which is going to help. But there is this very real difficulty of every project essentially being non-fungible. So it's it's been a bit challenging having every project review that comes onto our program management team's plate being a very different, set of documents to review. Yeah, great questions. We probably have time for one more question if anybody would like to prompt. Okay. All right, please.
People should announce who they're from. Right? People should announce who they are.
Hi, thanks. Walker Stanovsky, Davis Wright Tremaine. I'm curious what retirement and ultimately making a claim based on credit looks like in this space, and how you see in the digital future that we may build. How is that different from where we are today? And I should also say the flip side of that, making sure somebody else isn't making the same claim that didn't have the credit.
Yeah.
Maybe I can start. Or no, go ahead, Neil.
That's right. I mean, we're working on it. It's going to be through probably VCMI. There will be ways to do that, and actually the Climate Action Data Trust is a good start. So by having everything out there, we know it's there. The extension of that makes sense. So it's a good question, and it actually is in progress.
Maybe if I could just add one comment to that is that, that's one of the big issues that's in this whole sphere and discussion around tokenization, right? And it's a big issue. How do you make sure you're not double counting and double dipping and all that sort of stuff? So, just using the AirCarbon example, and it relates to our whole, this whole process that we've gone through, that we operate in a closed environment, a permission system, what have you. When we can retire carbon credits on behalf of, we have accounts with the registries, et cetera. We can retire carbon credits on behalf of clients on the registry, but when you retire a carbon credit on AirCarbon, through AirCarbon on the exchange and into one of the registries, Verra or whatever, you can't then tokenize it and use it. Like it's end of life. Like it's gone. It's used against a claim, and you have to document it that way. That's, I think, one of the challenges that we face in this world of digital assets for the use of carbon markets is specifically related to the endeavors that have tried to do that in the past. And I think that's why we're in the position that we're in now around this whole issue of tokenization. We have to make sure we don't double count. We need to do things that are right for the environment and make sure they go towards what they were intended.
Ironically, the technology provides a way to ensure that with the transparency on the blockchain. At the same time, it's that very technology then gets abused, and we know of examples where the tokens are bundled or debundled, and you end up with somebody out there double counting.
So but that's a person doing that. That's not.
It always is. It always is. But it's the technology that enables the person to do that. I mean, technology is not the be all and end all. It's not going to be the fail-safe.
The Climate Action Data Trust has the way to actually assure that's a double check for everything, and when they will have the recorded retirements through the registries.
Yeah.
By tying together all the registries.
It's going to happen.
Right.
Right. But the point about what I was saying before, it's not just claiming and double counting that I'm worried about. It's what is your claim, and how does that match to what you're buying? And there's that differentiator, and not every carbon credit is exactly equal, not what you're doing. Are your claims being matched off? Is there a matching? And that's important, and that's the systematic approach that goes through. So it is another level of it, but I think the basic foundation of what we want has already been built. So that's a good thing.
And the VCMII is going to be addressing that issue.
As a public good. This is stuff that needs to be a public good. These are, I think a lot of what's lost on people here is a lot of what we're building needs to be public good and not just for profit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, I'm really glad that the Climate Action Data Trust did not escape this conversation, even if it did come up at the very end. But we're at time. I want to thank the audience for braving it through your 10th cup of coffee today and not getting hypothermia in this very warm room. And I'd also like please give a hand to our panel today.
Thank you all. Thanks.